The stone floor felt cold beneath Eleanor's knees. Her hands were tied behind her back, with rough rope that cut into her wrists. She kept her eyes down as the king's voice boomed through the throne room. Her dark hair hung loose around her face, unwashed and tangled from 3 weeks in the dungeon. The smell of mold and dampness clung to her simple grey dress. She could feel dozens of eyes watching her. Courtiers whispered behind their hands. Guards stood ready with swords. Eleanor's heart beat so hard she thought everyone could hear it. "You stand accused of treason against the crown," the king said. His voice was hard as iron. "You plotted to poison the royal family. The evidence is clear." Eleanor wanted to scream that it was a lie. She wanted to tell them about her stepmother's hatred. She wanted to explain how Lady Margaret had placed the poison in her room and called the guards. But her throat felt tight and dry. No one would believe a poor girl with no family name. No one would listen to someone like her. "The sentence is death," the king declared. "You will be executed at dawn 3 days hence." The room spun around Eleanor. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She had survived his father's death when she was 12. She had endured her stepmother's cruelty for 6 long years. She had lived through beatings and starvation and being locked in cold rooms for days. She could face this with dignity too. But she was only 18. She had never been kissed. She had never danced at a ball. She had never seen the ocean or tasted chocolate or felt silk against her skin. Her life had been nothing but pain and service and invisible existence. Now it would end before it ever really began. Eleanor's days had been filled with work from before sunrise until long after dark. Her stepmother made sure of that. Lady Margaret could not stand to see Eleanor's face, which looked too much like the first wife her father had loved. So Eleanor scrubbed floors until her hands bled. She carried heavy buckets of water up 3 flights of stairs. She washed dishes in water so hot it burned her skin. She mended clothes by candlelight until her eyes hurt. "You are ugly and worthless," Lady Margaret would say every morning. "You should be grateful I allow you to live in this house at all." Eleanor's stepsisters, Clara and Beatrice, were no kinder. They were older than Eleanor by 2 and 3 years. They had inherited their mother's cruel nature and sharp tongues. They would trip Eleanor when she carried trays. They would dump dirty water on the floors she had just cleaned. They would tear their dresses on purpose, just to make her sew them again. "No man will ever want you," Clara said often. "You are too old now, too plain, too poor. You will die alone," Beatrice would add with a laugh. "A servant forever." But Eleanor found ways to survive. She would sing quietly while she worked. Songs her real mother had taught her. She would rescue injured birds and nurse them back to health in secret. She would read old books she found in the attic, teaching herself about faraway places and different lives. She would help the other servants when they were sick or tired. She would share her small portions of food with the stable boy who was always hungry. "You have a kind heart, Miss Eleanor," the cook would say. "That is worth more than gold." Eleanor held on to those words like treasures. She collected small moments of beauty. The way morning light came through dusty windows, the smell of bread baking, the sound of rain on the roof. These things kept her soul alive when everything else tried to crush it. But kindness had not saved her from the dungeon. Gentleness had not stopped the false accusation. And now her small, hard-won life would end on the executioner's block. Across the throne room, standing beside his father's chair, Prince Thomas watched the girl on her knees. He was 25 years old and had everything a man could want. Wealth beyond measure, a grand estate with 100 rooms, servants who jumped at his command, women who smiled and fluttered their fans whenever he entered a room. fine horses and expensive clothes and the finest wines from France. But Thomas felt empty inside. His days were filled with meaningless social events, balls where everyone wore false smiles, dinners where no one said anything real, conversations about weather and gossip and nothing that mattered. His nights were long and lonely in his huge bed. He would stare at the ceiling and wonder if this was all life had to offer. 2 years ago, his mother had died. The Queen had been the only person who truly loved him, not his title or his wealth. She had been kind and wise and gentle. When she got sick, Thomas had stayed by her bedside for weeks. He had held her hand as she grew weaker. He had watched helplessly as the life left her eyes. Since then, a cold darkness had lived in his chest. Nothing brought him joy anymore. Nothing felt worth doing. His father had become harder after the Queen's death too. The king made harsher laws. He showed no mercy to anyone. He grew suspicious and angry. The whole court lived in fear of his moods. Thomas tried to soften his father's decision sometimes, but the king rarely listened. "You are too soft," the king would say. "A ruler must be strong and feared." Thomas thought his mother would disagree. She had believed in kindness and justice. She had taught him that true strength came from protecting the weak. But she was gone now, and Thomas felt lost without her guidance. The king had been pushing Thomas to marry. There was a long list of eligible ladies from noble families. They were all beautiful in their silk gowns and perfect manners. They all said the right things and made the right gestures. But when Thomas looked into their eyes, he saw only calculation. They wanted his title and his money. They wanted power and position. None of them cared about the lonely man behind the prince. Thomas dreamed sometimes of a woman who would see him, really see him. A woman who would care about his thoughts and fears. A woman whose smile would be real and meant only for him. A woman who would fill the cold, empty space in his chest with warmth. But he had stopped believing such a woman existed. Now he looked at the girl kneeling before his father. She was small and thin, probably from not eating enough. Her dress was torn and dirty from the dungeon. Her hair was a mess, but she held her head up with dignity. Her jaw was set in determination. She did not beg or weep or plead. There was something brave in her silence, something proud in her stillness. Thomas found himself curious about her. Who was she? What had she really done? The evidence seemed too convenient, too perfect. His father had been quick to judge. No trial, no questions, just immediate sentencing. Something felt wrong about the whole situation. "Father," Thomas heard himself say. The word came out before he could stop it. "I request permission to speak." The king looked at his son with surprise. Thomas rarely spoke up in court. He usually stood silent and let his father handle everything. "What is it?" the king asked. Thomas did not know what he was going to say. He only knew that watching this girl die felt wrong. Letting this happen without question felt like failing some test his mother had prepared him for. He stepped forward, his heart pounding. "I wish to examine the evidence more closely," Thomas said. "The accusation seems rushed. Perhaps we should investigate further before carrying out such a final sentence." The king's face darkened. "The matter is settled. Justice will be served." "Justice," Thomas said carefully, "requires certainty." "What if we are wrong?" "We are not wrong," the king snapped. "The girl had poison in her room. Guards found it. She is guilty." Thomas looked at Eleanor again. She had raised her eyes now. They were brown and deep and full of pain, but also full of something else. Hope, maybe, or just surprise that anyone would speak for her. Their eyes met for just a moment. In that moment, Thomas felt something shift in his chest. The cold darkness cracked just a little. "Then give her to me," Thomas said suddenly. The words surprised him as much as everyone else. The throne room went completely silent. Every person stopped breathing. Eleanor's eyes went wide. The king stared at his son like he had gone mad. "What did you say?" the king asked slowly. Thomas's mind raced. What was he doing? But he could not stop now. Something pushed him forward. Some instinct he did not understand, but had to follow. "Give her to me as my wife," Thomas said more firmly. "If she is to die anyway, what difference does it make? Let me marry her instead. Her life becomes my responsibility. If she truly is a criminal, I will watch her myself. If she is innocent, we will have prevented a terrible mistake." The king stood up from his throne. "You want to marry this creature, this accused traitor? Have you lost your senses?" "Perhaps," Thomas said, "but I am making this request formally, Father. As your son and heir, I am asking for her life. I am asking to make her my wife." The courtiers began whispering loudly. Some laughed. Some looked shocked. The guards shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor remained frozen on her knees, unable to believe what she was hearing. The king studied his son for a long moment. Thomas could see the calculations happening behind his father's eyes. The king wanted Thomas married. He had been pressuring him for months. This was not the noble bride he had imagined, but it would bind Thomas to responsibility. It would end the questions about his son's future, and it would appear merciful without actually being weak. "Very well," the king finally said. "Since you seem determined to throw your life away on this girl, I will grant your request. But hear me clearly, she will be your burden. If she causes any trouble, any at all, both of you will face my judgment. Do you understand?" "I understand," Thomas said. He felt strangely calm now. This was either the stupidest or the smartest thing he had ever done. Time would tell. "Then it is decided," the king declared. "The girl will not be executed. Instead, she will marry Prince Thomas. The wedding will take place tomorrow." Eleanor felt Hans lift her from the floor. Her legs would barely hold her weight. She was not going to die. She was going to marry the prince. Her mind could not make sense of it. This had to be a dream or a trick. Things like this did not happen to girls like her. Guards led her away from the throne room. She looked back once and saw the prince watching her. His face was serious and handsome. His eyes were blue and sad. He had just saved her life. But why? She was nobody. She was nothing. What could he possibly want with her? That night, Eleanor was given a room in the castle. It was small but clean. There was a real bed with blankets. A servant brought her hot water to wash with. Another servant brought her food. Real food. Bread and cheese and meat and fruit. Eleanor could not remember the last time she had eaten so much. She cried as she ate, overwhelmed by everything that had happened. A kind older woman came to help her prepare for the wedding. Her name was Mrs. Davies, and she was the prince's housekeeper. "Do not be afraid, dear," Mrs. Davies said gently. "His Highness is a good man. He will not hurt you." "Why did he do this?" Eleanor whispered. "Why would he marry someone like me?" "I cannot say for certain," Mrs. Davies replied, as she brushed Eleanor's hair. "But the prince has been lost since his mother died. Perhaps he sees something in you that we cannot see yet. Perhaps you both need each other." Eleanor did not know what to think of that. She only knew that tomorrow she would marry a stranger, a prince, a man who had saved her from death but might demand payment. She could not give. She was terrified and confused and still half convinced she would wake up back in the dungeon. The wedding took place the next morning in the castle chapel. There were no guests except the king and a few required witnesses. Eleanor wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Davies had found for her. It was too big and had to be pinned in several places. Her hair was clean and braided. She had no flowers or jewelry. She felt small and out of place. Thomas wore his formal prince clothes, a deep blue coat with gold buttons, a white shirt with a high collar. He looked every bit the royal he was. When he saw Eleanor enter the chapel, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or relief that she was real and not a dream. They stood before the priest. Eleanor's hands shook. Thomas noticed and reached out to steady her. His hands were warm and strong. His touch was gentle. Eleanor looked up at him in surprise. He gave her a small nod, as if to say it would be all right. The priest spoke the old words. Eleanor barely heard them. Her heart was beating too loud. When it came time for vows, Thomas spoke clearly and firmly. Eleanor's voice came out as barely a whisper. The priest declared them married. Thomas lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it softly. The gesture was old-fashioned and courteous. It made Eleanor's breath catch.
"Hello, wife," Thomas said quietly.
There was no mockery in his voice, only curiosity and something that might have been nervousness. "Hello, husband," Eleanor managed to say. The word felt strange on her tongue. She had a husband now. She was a princess. Nothing made sense anymore. After the ceremony, Thomas led Eleanor to his private wing of the castle. The rooms were bigger than her stepmother's entire house. There were soft carpets and beautiful paintings and furniture that looked like art. Eleanor was afraid to touch anything. She stood in the middle of the sitting room, feeling completely lost. Thomas watched her carefully. She looked like a frightened rabbit ready to run. He needed to put her at ease somehow, but he was not sure how. He was used to noble women who flirted and schemed. He did not know how to talk to this quiet, scared girl. "Are you hungry?" he asked finally. Eleanor shook her head, though she was always hungry. Years of not having enough food had taught her to deny her needs. "You are lying," Thomas said, but not unkindly. "I can see it. Sit down. I will have food brought." He guided her to a sofa. Eleanor perched on the edge, like she might need to run. Thomas rang a bell, and servants appeared with trays of food, bread and cheese, and cold meat and pastries and tea. More food than Eleanor usually saw in a week. "Eat," Thomas said. "Please. You are too thin." Eleanor picked up a piece of bread with shaking hands. She ate slowly, trying to remember her manners. Thomas sat across from her and poured tea. He added sugar and cream and handed her a cup. The kindness of the gesture made Eleanor's eyes sting with tears. "Why are you crying?" Thomas asked, alarmed. "No one has ever served me tea before," Eleanor whispered. "I am always the one serving." Thomas felt something twist in his chest. "Who are you?" he asked. "Who are you really?" So Eleanor told him. She told him about her father, who had died, about her stepmother's cruelty, about years of being treated like she was worth nothing, about the poison planted in her room and the false accusation. She spoke quietly, her voice getting stronger as she went. She had expected him to not believe her, but Thomas listened to every word. His face grew darker as her story went on. "Why did you not defend yourself in the throne room?" Thomas asked when she finished. "Who would believe me?" Eleanor said simply, "I am nobody. Lady Margaret is connected to powerful families. Her word would always matter more than mine." "Your word matters to me," Thomas said firmly. "I believe you." Eleanor looked at him in shock. "Why?" Thomas thought about that. "Because I saw your face. I saw how you held yourself. You did not look guilty. You looked brave." And because your story has the ring of truth, I have met enough liars at court to know the difference. Something warm bloomed in Eleanor's chest. Someone believed her. Someone saw her as more than worthless. She did not know what to do with this feeling. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving my life, for believing me. I will not be a burden to you. I can work. You are not a servant here," Thomas interrupted. "You are my wife, a princess. You do not need to work." "I do not know how to be a princess," Eleanor admitted. Her voice was very small. "I barely know how to be a prince," Thomas said with a sad smile. "Perhaps we can figure it out together." That night was Eleanor's first night as Thomas's wife. She was terrified of what he might expect, but Thomas only showed her to a beautiful bedroom and said good night. He slept in his own room down the hall. Eleanor lay awake in the soft bed, staring at the ceiling. She was safe. She was fed. She was alive. It felt like a miracle. The next few days were strange for both of them. Thomas had never lived with a woman before except his mother and servants. Eleanor had never been treated with respect before. They moved around each other carefully, like dancers learning new steps. Thomas noticed small things about Eleanor, the way she would touch the soft curtains like they were precious, how she thanked servants so sincerely they did not know what to do, the way she would stand at the window and watch birds with a gentle smile. Her hands were rough and scarred from years of hard work. She walked quietly, like she was used to being invisible. She ate slowly, savoring every bite like it might be her last meal. Eleanor noticed things about Thomas too. He was kind to servants but distant, like he did not know how to really connect. He would sit alone in his study for hours, staring at nothing. Sometimes she heard him pacing his room late at night. He kept a small portrait of a beautiful woman on his desk. His mother, Eleanor guessed. He would look at it when he thought no one was watching. There was such sadness in his eyes, it made Eleanor's heart hurt. One evening, Eleanor found Thomas in the garden. He was sitting on a bench, looking at the sunset. She almost turned away, not wanting to bother him. But something made her walk closer. "May I sit with you?" she asked quietly. Thomas looked surprised but nodded. Eleanor sat down, leaving a proper space between them. They sat in silence for several minutes. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was peaceful. "I miss her," Thomas said suddenly. "My mother, she died 2 years ago. But some days it feels like yesterday." "I miss my father," Eleanor replied softly. "He died 6 years ago. The grief does not go away, but it changes. It becomes something you carry instead of something that crushes you." Thomas looked at her with new interest. "How did you survive after he died, and you were left with those horrible people?" Eleanor thought carefully. "I found small things to love, birds and books and songs. I helped others when I could. I held on to the belief that I was worth something, even when everyone said I was not. Some days I barely believed it, but I kept trying." "You are very strong," Thomas said with admiration. "I did not have a choice," Eleanor replied. "When you have nothing, you either find strength or you break. I refuse to break." Thomas felt something in him respond to her words. She understood suffering. She understood loneliness. But she had not let it destroy her kindness. He suddenly wanted to know everything about her. "Tell me something you always wanted to do," he said. "Something you dreamed about." Eleanor blushed. "It will sound silly." "Tell me anyway." "I always wanted to dance," Eleanor admitted. "I would watch my stepsisters prepare for balls. They had beautiful gowns and dancing lessons. I would imagine what it felt like to dance with someone, to have music and movement and joy." Thomas stood up and held out his hand. Dance with me now. Eleanor stared at him. There is no music. We will make our own, Thomas said. Come. Eleanor took his hand with wonder. Thomas pulled her close, one hand on her waist, the other holding her hand. He began to hum a waltz. They moved slowly across the garden path. Eleanor stumbled at first, not knowing the steps, but Thomas guided her patiently. Soon they were moving together, turning in slow circles. The sun was setting behind them, painting the sky gold and pink. Eleanor laughed. The sound surprised them both. It was the first time Thomas had heard her laugh. It was bright and genuine and beautiful. He pulled her a little closer. She did not pull away. They danced until the stars came out. Neither of them wanted to stop. That night changed something between them. They started spending more time together. Thomas taught Eleanor to ride horses. She was afraid at first, but he stayed beside her, encouraging her. She learned quickly and soon loved the feeling of riding through the countryside. Eleanor showed Thomas the small injured animals she had secretly been rescuing. He built her a proper space to care for them. He liked watching her gentle hands nurse a bird with a broken wing or a rabbit that had been caught by a dog. They had long conversations over dinner. Thomas told her about the loneliness of court life, the fake smiles and false friends, the weight of expectations. Eleanor told him about the books she had read, the worlds she had escaped to in her mind, the dreams she had kept secret for so long. Mrs. Davies watched them with a knowing smile. I told you, she said to Eleanor one day. You needed each other. Eleanor was beginning to think Mrs. Davies was right. When she was with Thomas, she felt safe, more than safe. She felt seen and valued. Thomas looked at her like she mattered. He asked her opinions. He laughed at her observations. He touched her gently, carefully, like she was precious. Thomas was changing too. The cold emptiness in his chest was warming. He found himself thinking about Eleanor constantly, the way she bit her lip when she was thinking, how she would tuck her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, the sound of her voice reading aloud in the evening, the feel of her hand in his when they walked. He started to understand what he had been missing. Not just any wife. Her, specifically her. One afternoon a storm came suddenly. Thunder crashed and rain poured down. Eleanor was in the garden when it started. She ran inside, soaked and laughing. Thomas met her in the hall with a towel. He wrapped it around her shoulders. She was shivering and her hair was dripping wet. She looked up at him with bright eyes. That was wonderful, she said breathlessly. I love storms. You are strange, Thomas said, but he was smiling. I know, Eleanor replied. My stepmother always said so. I think I like strange, Thomas said softly. He reached out and tucked a wet strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered on her cheek. Eleanor's breath caught. They were standing very close now. Thomas's eyes dropped to her lips. Eleanor's heart was racing. Eleanor, he whispered. It was the first time he had said her name. It sounded perfect in his voice. Yes, she breathed. I think I am falling in love with you. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. That cannot be true. You barely know me. I am not beautiful or accomplished or... You are beautiful to me, Thomas interrupted. You are kind and brave and strong. You see the world with wonder even after everything that hurt you. You make me feel alive again. You make me want to be better. That is worth more than all the accomplishments in the world. I do not know how to be loved. Eleanor whispered. No one has ever. Then we will learn together, Thomas said. He cupped her face in both hands. May I kiss you? Eleanor could only nod. Thomas leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away. But she did not pull away. Their lips met softly at first, then deeper. Eleanor's first kiss, it was gentle and sweet, and made her feel like she was floating. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. "Oh," Eleanor said. "Oh, indeed," Thomas replied with a smile. Then he kissed her again. From that day, everything was different. Thomas and Eleanor were truly together now, not just married on paper, truly connected. They spent their days together, and their nights together. Thomas moved Eleanor's things into his room. He held her while they slept. She would wake up safe in his arms and marvel at how her life had changed. Thomas began to see Eleanor's influence everywhere. She treated servants with such kindness that they adored her. She suggested improvements to help the poor in the kingdom. She spoke to Thomas about mercy and justice. He found himself thinking of his mother and how proud she would be. Eleanor was bringing back the values he had lost. The court began to notice their happiness. Some were jealous, others were shocked. The prince had married a nobody and seemed completely besotted with her. It was scandalous, but Thomas did not care. He had never been happier. One evening, Thomas took Eleanor to a private ballroom. Musicians were waiting there. Eleanor looked at him with confusion. "You said you always wanted to dance at a ball," Thomas explained, "so I am giving you a ball, just for us." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. Thomas had remembered. He had arranged all of this, just to make her dream come true. She was wearing a new gown he had ordered for her, blue silk that made her eyes shine. She felt like a princess for the first time. "May I have this dance, my lady?" Thomas asked formally, bowing. "You may, my lord," Eleanor replied with a smile. They danced for hours, just the two of them and the music. Thomas waltzed her around the ballroom. He lifted her and spun her. She laughed with pure joy. When the music slowed, he pulled her close and they swayed together. Eleanor rested her head on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat. It matched her own. "I love you," Eleanor said suddenly. She had not planned to say it, but it was true, and she needed him to know. Thomas stopped moving. He tilted her face up to look at him. "Say it again." "I love you," Eleanor repeated, stronger this time. "I love you, Thomas. You saved my life, and then you gave me a reason to live. You made me believe I am worth loving. You are everything I never knew I needed." Thomas kissed her deeply. "I love you too," he said against her lips. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone. You healed my heart. You brought light back into my darkness. You are my home." They held each other close, swaying to music that had stopped playing. Neither of them noticed. They only needed each other. Everything was perfect. Everything was finally right. But happiness in stories is never simple. Shadows were gathering that they did not yet see. Danger was coming from an unexpected place. Lady Margaret had heard about Eleanor's marriage. The news had reached her days after the wedding. At first, she could not believe it. The worthless girl she had tried to destroy was now a princess. It was impossible. It was wrong. Rage filled Lady Margaret's heart. She had her reasons for hating Eleanor. Margaret had been jealous of Thomas's father's first wife. The first wife had been beautiful and kind and loved by everyone. When she died, Thomas's father had been broken. Margaret had married him hoping for love, but he had only wanted a mother for Eleanor. He had never loved Margaret. He had tolerated her. When Thomas's father died, Margaret had seen a chance to erase the first wife's memory by destroying her daughter. She had planted the poison. She had called the guards. She had been so close to winning. But somehow, Eleanor had survived. Not just survived, thrived. Lady Margaret could not let this stand. She began planning. She travelled to the castle with her daughters. She requested an audience with the king. She had a story prepared, a lie that would destroy everything. Meanwhile, Eleanor and Thomas remained blissfully unaware. They were planning their future together. Thomas wanted to take Eleanor travelling, show her the ocean she had never seen. Eleanor wanted to start charitable works to help girls like her who had nothing. "We could build a school," Eleanor said excitedly one morning over breakfast, "for girls with no families, teach them skills and reading and give them chances." "That is a wonderful idea," Thomas agreed. "We will do it. Whatever you want, we will make it happen." Eleanor reached across the table and took his hand. "I cannot believe this is my life now. Sometimes I am afraid I will wake up." "You will not wake up," Thomas promised. "This is real. We are real. And I will spend every day making sure you know how precious you are." They kissed across the breakfast table. Mrs. Davies walked in and cleared her throat with a smile. "Forgive the interruption, Your Highnesses, but you have a visitor. Lady Margaret has requested an audience." Eleanor's face went pale. Her hand tightened on Thomas's. All her fear came rushing back. Her stepmother was here, in the castle, the woman who had tried to kill her. "I will send her away," Thomas said immediately, seeing Eleanor's panic. "No," Eleanor said, finding her courage. "I am not powerless anymore. I am not that scared girl. Let her come. Let her see that she did not destroy me." Thomas studied her face. "You are certain?" "I am certain," Eleanor said, though her voice shook a little. "But please stay with me." "Always," Thomas promised. Lady Margaret entered the sitting room with Clara and Beatrice behind her. They all curtsied to Thomas, then looked at Eleanor with poorly hidden hatred. Eleanor sat up straight in her chair. She wore a beautiful gown now. Her hair was styled elegantly. She looked like the princess she had become, but inside she felt like she was 12 years old again. "Your Highness," Lady Margaret said sweetly to Thomas, "how wonderful to see my dear stepdaughter doing so well. We were so worried about her." "Worried?" Thomas said coldly. "You accused her of treason." "A terrible misunderstanding," Lady Margaret said smoothly. "We did not know the poison was not hers. We were simply doing our duty to report what we found. We are so relieved justice was served correctly in the end." Eleanor could hear the lie in every word, but Lady Margaret was clever. She had prepared her story well. Thomas looked at Eleanor, letting her decide how to respond. "What do you want?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Want? Why, nothing, dear," Lady Margaret said. "We simply came to congratulate you and to warn you." "Warn me?" Eleanor said. Dread filled her stomach. Lady Margaret's eyes glittered with malice. "Your marriage may not be legitimate. You see, your father had debts when he died. Significant debts. By law, that makes you bound property until those debts are paid. You cannot marry without permission of your creditors. And I hold those debts." The room went silent. Thomas stood up slowly. "What are you saying?" "I am saying," Lady Margaret continued, "that Eleanor's marriage to you may be illegal. Unless those debts are satisfied, she is still bound to me. If the marriage is illegal, it can be annulled, and a woman who tricks a prince into false marriage, well, that is still treason, is it not?" Eleanor felt the world spinning. It could not be true. After everything, was she going to lose it all? Would she be sent back to that horrible house, or back to the dungeon? "How much?" Thomas demanded. "What are these supposed debts?" £50,000, Lady Margaret said casually. It was an enormous sum, more than most people saw in a lifetime. "That is ridiculous," Eleanor gasped. "My father had some debts, but nothing like that." "Interest accumulates, dear," Lady Margaret said with false sympathy. It has been 6 years, and there were costs for your care all that time. The debt is real. I have papers to prove it. Thomas's mind was racing. He could pay £50,000 easily, but something felt wrong. This was blackmail. And if he paid, what would stop Lady Margaret from making more demands? He needed time to think, time to investigate. I will need to see these papers, Thomas said carefully, and have my solicitors review them. This is a serious claim. Of course, Lady Margaret agreed, but until it is resolved, perhaps Eleanor should return home with us. To avoid any impropriety? No, Thomas said flatly. Eleanor stays here, with me, as my wife. Lady Margaret's smile turned sharp. I see. Well then, Your Highness, I suppose we will see what the courts say, and what your father the king says when he learns his son may have been tricked into illegal marriage. She curtsied again and swept out of the room with her daughters. Eleanor sat frozen in her chair. Thomas immediately came to her and knelt beside her. Eleanor, look at me, he said urgently. She raised her eyes to his. They were full of tears and terror. She is going to take me away from you, Eleanor whispered. She is going to destroy everything. No, Thomas said firmly. I will not let her. I will pay the debts, real or fake. I will fight any legal challenge. I will go to my father and explain everything. You are my wife. Nothing will change that. But what if? No, Thomas interrupted. No more what ifs. Trust me, trust us. We will survive this. But Eleanor could see doubt in his eyes too. Lady Margaret was clever and connected. She could make trouble, real trouble. And if the king thought Thomas had been made a fool, his anger would be terrible. Everything they had built together was suddenly at risk. That night, Eleanor could not sleep. She lay in Thomas's arms, but she felt far away. Her mind was full of dark thoughts. Maybe she should leave. Maybe she should go back to Lady Margaret and work off the debt. It would take the rest of her life, but at least Thomas would be safe. At least she would not ruin him. I can hear you thinking, Thomas murmured in the darkness. I cannot stop, Eleanor admitted. What are you thinking? That maybe I should leave. Before I destroy your life. Thomas sat up and lit a candle. He turned to face Eleanor, his expression fierce. You listen to me. You are not leaving. You are not destroying anything. That woman is poison. She is lying and manipulating and trying to take away the one good thing I have found. I will not let her win. But the debt is either fake or inflated, Thomas said. I will have it investigated, and even if it is real, I will pay it gladly. Do you understand? You are worth every penny and more. You are worth everything to me. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. I love you so much. I cannot bear the thought of hurting you. You could never hurt me, Thomas said softly. He wiped her tears with his thumbs. Only losing you would hurt me. Stay. Fight with me. Believe in us. Eleanor nodded. She wanted to believe. She wanted to be brave, but fear was a powerful thing. It whispered terrible possibilities in her mind all night long. The next few days were difficult. Thomas met with solicitors and investigators. He presented the situation to his father. The king was angry at first, as Thomas had expected, but Thomas stood firm. He declared his love for Eleanor. He insisted the marriage was valid. He demanded a full investigation of Lady Margaret's claims. The king sent his own lawyers to examine the debt papers. They discovered that Lady Margaret had indeed inflated the numbers. The original debt had been less than £5,000. Margaret had added false expenses and outrageous interest. It was fraud. But proving fraud took time. And during that time, Lady Margaret was spreading rumours at court. She whispered that Eleanor had tricked the prince, that Eleanor was a scheming servant who had manipulated her way into marriage, that the whole thing was embarrassing to the royal family. Some courtiers began to whisper too. They had never accepted Eleanor anyway. She was too common, too plain, too different. Eleanor heard the whispers when she walked through the castle. She saw the looks. She felt the judgment. Her old insecurities came roaring back. Maybe they were right. Maybe she did not belong here. Maybe Thomas would be better off without her. One afternoon, Eleanor made a decision. She could not do this to Thomas. She could not let him be ruined by association with her. She wrote him a letter explaining everything, how much she loved him, how she was leaving to protect him, how he should find someone worthy of his position. She left the letter on his desk and slipped out of the castle, wearing a servant's cloak. She got as far as the front gates before Thomas caught her. He had returned early and read her letter. Panic had driven him after her. He grabbed her arm and spun her around. "What are you doing?" he demanded. His face was wild with fear and anger. "Letting you go," Eleanor said through tears. "You deserve better than me. You deserve someone who does not bring shame and scandal." "I deserve you," Thomas said fiercely. "Only you. Do you not understand that yet?" "Everyone thinks I tricked you," Eleanor sobbed. "They are right. I am nobody. I am worthless. I should never have let you save me." Thomas grabbed her face in both hands. "You are not worthless. You are everything. And I did not save you. We saved each other. You brought me back to life. You taught me how to feel again. Without you, I am just an empty man going through the motions. With you, I am whole. I am happy. I am myself." "But Lady Margaret is a liar who is about to be exposed," Thomas interrupted. "The investigators found the fraud. She will be arrested. Her claims will be dismissed. We have won, Eleanor, but none of that matters if you leave me. Nothing matters without you." Eleanor looked into his eyes. She saw love there, real, true love. Not obligation or pity. He really meant every word. She had spent so long thinking she was worthless that she could not accept being treasured. But Thomas was showing her the truth. She was worthy. She was loved. She deserved this happiness. "I am so afraid," she whispered. "I know," Thomas said gently. "But we can be afraid together. Stay. Please stay." Eleanor nodded. Thomas pulled her into his arms and held her tight. She buried her face in his chest and cried. He stroked her hair and murmured promises. They stood at the castle gates until her tears stopped. Then he led her back inside, back home, where she belonged. Lady Margaret was arrested the next day. The evidence of her fraud was clear. She had also been caught trying to bribe court officials. Her daughters testified against her to save themselves. Lady Margaret was sentenced to prison for fraud and attempted blackmail of the royal family. Justice was finally served. The court gossip shifted quickly. Now people whispered about the prince's devotion to his wife. How he had fought for her against all odds. How their love had conquered scandal. Eleanor became a figure of fascination instead of mockery. But she did not care about court opinion anymore. She only cared about Thomas. The king summoned them both to a private audience. Thomas and Eleanor stood before him, hands clasped together. The king studied them for a long moment. "I doubted this marriage," the king said finally. "I thought you were being foolish, my son, but I was wrong. I see how you look at each other. I see the strength you have together. It reminds me of how I loved your mother." Thomas's eyes widened. The king never spoke of the queen's death, never acknowledged his own grief. Love like that is rare, the king continued. His voice was rough with emotion. When you find it, you hold on to it. No matter what anyone says, no matter what the cost. You did right, Thomas. You chose love over duty. That takes courage. I am proud of you. Thomas felt tears prick his eyes. Thank you, father. The king turned to Eleanor. And you, daughter, you have brought my son back from darkness. You have shown strength and grace under terrible pressure. You are more worthy of being a princess than any high-born lady. I am glad to have you in our family. Eleanor curtsied deeply. Thank you, your majesty. I will spend my life trying to be worthy of that honor. You already are, the king said. Then, in a gesture that shocked everyone, he stepped forward and kissed Eleanor's forehead. It was an acknowledgement, an acceptance, a blessing. Thomas and Eleanor left the throne room hand in hand. They had survived the crisis. They had proven their love. Nothing would ever threaten them again. They were truly together now, forever. A month later, Thomas threw a grand ball. He invited everyone at court. He made sure Eleanor had the most beautiful gown ever created. Deep red silk, with embroidery of gold thread, jewels that had belonged to his mother. Her hair was styled perfectly. She looked like a queen. When they entered the ballroom together, everyone stared. Thomas led Eleanor to the center of the floor. The music began. They danced together as everyone watched. Thomas looked only at Eleanor. She looked only at him. They moved together perfectly, lost in each other. As they waltzed, Thomas whispered in her ear, "Are you happy?" "More than I ever imagined possible," Eleanor replied. "Good," Thomas said, "because I plan to spend the rest of our lives making you even happier." Eleanor laughed, that bright, beautiful laugh that Thomas loved. "That sounds perfect." After the ball, Thomas took Eleanor out to the garden, the same place where they had first danced together. He had a surprise for her. A small building had been constructed. Inside was the school she had dreamed of. It was already furnished and ready. Teachers had been hired. Girls with no families would soon live and learn there. "You did this?" Eleanor gasped. "We did this," Thomas corrected. "Together. This is just the beginning. We will do so much good together, Eleanor. We will change lives. We will help people who need hope, just like we found hope in each other." Eleanor threw her arms around his neck. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Thomas said. "My brave, beautiful wife, my perfect match, my home." They kissed under the stars. Their future stretched ahead of them, bright and full of promise. They had survived darkness and found light. They had overcome obstacles and found strength. They had discovered love when they had nothing left to lose, and that love had transformed everything. Years later, people would tell their story. The king's son, who begged to marry the girl, condemned to die. The servant who became a princess. The love that conquered scandal and hate and fear. But for Thomas and Eleanor, it was never just a story. It was their life, their truth, their happily ever after. They went on to have children who inherited their kindness. They built schools and hospitals and helped thousands of people. They grew old together, still dancing in gardens, still holding hands, still looking at each other like they were the most precious thing in the world, because to each other they were. Eleanor never forgot the girl she had been, the scared, broken girl on her knees in the throne room, but she also never doubted the woman she had become, the woman Thomas had seen in her from the very beginning, the woman who deserved love and happiness and everything good. She had learned that worthiness is not given by others. It lives inside us. Sometimes it just takes the right person to help us see it. Thomas never forgot the emptiness he had felt before Eleanor. the loneliness that had consumed him. But he also never took for granted the fullness he felt with her. Every day was a gift. Every moment together was precious. He had learned that true strength is not in power or wealth. It is in vulnerability, in opening your heart even when you are afraid, in choosing love even when it seems impossible. Together they were more than the sum of their parts. They were proof that miracles can happen, that love can heal, that second chances exist, that happy endings are real. Their story became legend, but to them it was simply life, beautiful, messy, perfect life, and they lived it fully, joyfully together, always together. If this story touched your heart, if you felt Eleanor's pain and rejoiced in her triumph, please like this video and share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe for more stories of love conquering all, of second chances, and of happily ever afters, because everyone deserves to believe in the power of true love. Thank you for letting me share this journey with you.